Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCG Dragonstorm wrap-up episode for Mile High Mana. Today, this will also be our first special guest episode with a top 32 finisher of the main event of SCG Dragonstorm, Joe Nunez. So we're going to pick Joe's brain on the event, himself as a Magic player, where he came from, where he's going, and how he approaches the game. I'm still joined here with Lee Wilson, as well as Joe himself. Uh, but once we go through most of that, Lee's also going to talk about some of his wins for the weekend. I have a few losses to discuss, and then we'll talk a little bit about the future Denver Magic here. Lee, you want to go ahead and say what's up?
Yeah, hey guys, nice to be home. I've been on the road for like almost a month. Feels amazing to be back in my spot. But SCG Con was really fun. Like I've done, a bunch of Grand Prix and SCG Cons in the past, but it's like really nice when you get to like wake up in your own bed and then like Grant makes you like a delicious breakfast and then he drives you to the event and it's like right in your hometown. So honestly, I wish we'd have more of these. But yeah, no, I glad to have Joe on and looking forward to it. Joe, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, thanks for having me on. Joe Nunez is my full name. I finished 23rd at the main event at SCG Con Spotlight Series. Started out 8-0 on the first day. Then the two drafts I went 2-1 and then a disappointing 0-2-1 to just miss top 8. But overall, pretty good result on the weekend.
Yeah, I'd say so too, Joe. I am curious too, like before I guess we hop into your event, can you just give us like the couple minute rundown on, you as a Magic player, when you started, what's your first set, the format you like to play, the goals that you have, just tell us about you.
Yeah, so I guess I first started learning Magic, I think I was like 14 or 15 at a summer camp. Didn't really start getting into it until around the first Kanzatar Kier. That was when I started first playing Standard, going to FNMs, playing like real constructed formats rather than just, kitchen table stuff. And then I took a break for a while when I went off to college, and then kind of got back into it around 2022, started playing RCQs, and then I've been getting gradually more into it. I think I've been to 5 regional championships, and then this is my first sort of non-big regional championship tournament that was an open.
So are you usually sticking to whatever the RC format is at the time, or do you have like a format that you favor?
Yeah, I'd say my favorite format's probably Legacy. Or not Legacy, sorry, Modern. I usually play Modern, independent of whatever the RC season is, and then I'll usually also be playing whatever the current RCQ format is.
Way to juke the podcast out, Joe, saying that Legacy is your favorite format.
I do enjoy Legacy, but it's hard to find the time sometimes when you're keeping up with multiple other formats at the same time.
Did you do a bunch of prep or like just look at the spoiler, play a bunch of arena? Like what was your kind of thought process going into this?
Yeah, so I guess first thing, just big shout out to Kobe Keller. He and a group of people in Denver. He put together a just like a full proxy set as soon as the full spoiler was out, so that we could start doing practice sealed pools and drafts even before we had access to the physical cards themselves. So that definitely helped getting a jump start on the set. And then hit up as many pre-releases as I could weekend of, and then throughout this week I did a couple drafts and a couple sealed events. So what I felt like was a good amount of prep for the event, given the time I had. Still had a kind of a busy work week, unfortunately, but was able to get in a good amount of prep and feel like it paid off pretty well.
When you opened up your sealed pool on the first day, did it like look like a 8-0, 9-0 deck, or like what was your vibe in the morning?
Yeah, I was pretty happy with my sealed pool. I had some reservations about the mana, but it ended up working out very well. So I ended up playing kind of like a 4-color non-white cards. There were technically a couple white cards in the deck, but I was playing them more for the Omen side. It was the white-red dragon, but I did get to cast the dragon a couple times. But it was mostly like a teamer / Sultai deck. I felt like I had some really good bombs in there. I had Roar of Endless Song, which a lot of people were talking about as sort of one of the most broken rares you can get in sealed, or just limited in general. Probably one of the like 2 or 3 best rares in the set. I think the other one that's close is Meringue River Regent, the blue dragon that can bounce two things. That one's really good. But I also got an Eshki Dragon Claw, a Warden of the Grove, a Sinkhole Surveyor, and a Sidisi Regent of the Mire. So I had like five pretty solid rares, one of which was like fantastic, that I could play in mostly four colors. And then the lands that I opened lined up very well as well, because I had, I think, one green-red land, two blue-black, and two red-black. So that supported the splash very well. And it really didn't have any mana issues all day with that. So yeah, I felt like I just got to kind of play really powerful pool. I had two Rakshasas bargains in my deck, which were really good all day, just helping me dig through my deck, find those rares, and really lean on the power of those to break through. I think in sealed especially, you tend to get a lot of board stalls, and that Temur Saga Roar of Endless Song is just fantastic at sort of punching through those, because you get to double all your creatures' power and toughness, and then just kind of swing out, and your opponent just kind of has to end up taking some bad blocks.
So yeah, and the double Rakshas's bargain too. I mean, any card that's killing it in Legacy right now has to be great in sealed. But one question I have about where your pull landed was, what it sounds to me like you did, many sealed pulls, drafts to prepare for the event on like a sliding scale of like 1 to 10, 10 being, the best you could ask for. Where do you think your sealed pool landed?
I think it probably definitely gotta be like up there around an 8 or a 9. I think there's only like a few cards I think that are really stronger than that Temur Saga that I could have asked for, quote unquote. Obviously can't really have asked for a better deck given that I didn't lose any matches with it. But in terms of like if I were building a dream sealed pool just from scratch, I think the top cards in the set have got to be like the Ugin, the Elspeth Stormslayer, and then I'd probably say the Meringue River Regent right after that. Those are all nice because they're either colorless or monocolored, so they leave you with a lot of deck building flexibility. The Temur Saga does, kind of pin you into Temur, but it worked out very well with the rest of my pool, getting to run that and like kind of all the good cards along with it.
Yeah,
I think this was probably the best pool I had, out of like all the drafts and pre-releases I did, except maybe one other was close. I had a really good Abzan pool with like there's a very good Abzan Saga that I got in draft that I think is also up there in that like top tier of bombs in the set.
sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, some of those cards too, like the Ugin and the Elspeth, those just sound like an absolute dream to open an event like this. And I'm glad to see that like the best pull that you got is, when it comes to game time, right? So that's all you can really ask for too. But obviously a good pull is great, but playing tight is something that's super important too. And this event was unique in the way that not a lot of the players didn't have a ton of time with the cards. So was it pretty easy to tell the folks that like hadn't put in the work when you were playing some of the earlier rounds versus the folks like you and Kobe and team that, went behind the scenes and printed out the set and really grinded, a couple weeks in advance, which is really all the time that we had.
Yeah, I think there were definitely a few times during the day where there were people didn't quite know how a card worked, just like thinking something was an instant, or like there's the card Glacial Dragon Hunt has like a reflexive trigger, and my opponent didn't know it worked like that. Which I think kind of always comes up in limited. There's just a lot of cards that you don't necessarily get a ton of reps with the way you do in Constructed to really kind of learn the mechanical ins and outs. But I think it definitely did just help. I think most of all just having like a good grasp of kind of the combat tricks in each color and knowing like what cards people could be playing to maybe blow me out in a certain spot, and kind of being able to maneuver around that a little bit, I think was definitely a big advantage throughout the day.
Things that I was always afraid of when I watched the Pro Tour coverage is like day one, everyone plays limited, and it's a wholly random field, and then the guys who go undefeated on day one have to sit down at the draft table with all the other guys who basically went undefeated over the top. So like, what was your mindset going into trying to draft against probably the 8 best limited players in the room, or you know what I mean? Like what did that feel like?
Definitely a little intimidating. Hadn't done a like a called draft before that. All the other big events I'd done had just been constructed. I felt like I had some pretty good opens. My pack one pick one was the Carsey Revenant, the kind of Nighthawk scavenger card with Renew, which I think is also one of the top rares in the set. Definitely just because being monocolored is a big benefit because it doesn't really pin you into a certain clan. And then my second pick was actually that Abzan Saga I mentioned earlier. Um, and at that point, I was like, hopefully, I'll be able to run this or at least splash it. And then just kind of ended up getting a pretty decent Abzan pool on top of that. I think I think once I got into it, it was just like, yeah, it's drafting. I like to draft. I've done it before, and once you sort of get into it, you just think about what's the best card in the pack for me, and then I think it's more the waiting in anticipation of the draft that was a little nerve wracking. But once you got into it, I think it was fine.
And for the listener too, that doesn't really have an understanding of the structure of these events, there's so much magic that you play in one of these large main events. We're talking about, spending an hour to an hour and a half on just the player registration of opening a sealed pull and then creating the deck and then having the person across from you register the deck. And that takes a ton of time in of itself. And then playing 8 rounds straight where X2 or better makes day two. And then day two, I feel like, is really where the gridiron starts too, because you're doing three separate drafts. So every 3 rounds that you make it through, you're doing a draft. And then after that, so 3 drafts, 3 rounds each, 9 rounds of magic, then you make the cut to top eight. So like when we were watching coverage, we were in mountain time and it was pushing like midnight before the whole event wrapped up. So I mean, East Coast, we're talking about almost 2 in the morning. So just to sort of further highlight, how much of an accomplishment this is for you, Joe. But this wouldn't be Mile High Mana if we didn't really dive deep into what happened towards those last 3 rounds. I want to try and understand, for the listener and for myself that might be trying to get better here and limited, do you have a really good identification of what happened there towards the end on those last three win-ins? Was it pull related or was it play related or, talk to me here.
Yeah, I think a mix of both. I think I made a couple miscues during the draft. I think one was I took the card Tygam Master Opportunist, I think is its name, the 2-drop mythic in blue that has a flurry. When you cast your second spell, you exile it and put 4 time counters on it, it gains a spend, and then you get a copy of it right away. I took that thinking it would be a lot stronger than it ended up being. There's a cool interaction with Tygam where uh, because it's the card that gets exiled, if your second spell is an omen, you can then cast it later as the dragon side, so you can get like you can pay the cheaper cost up front and then get the dragon itself later. I was kind of hoping that would be a stronger interaction than it ended up being. Ultimately, the way it played out in all my games was that the suspended copy would I'd either be like dead or like way too far behind by the time it came up. And then I think I may have made a couple small misplays during, like, I recall one match, I think also kind of Tygam related, was I had Tygam out and then I had a Piercing Exhale and a Dragon Spray in my hand. Piercing Exhale being like the punch effect where your creature deals damage equal to its power. Dragon Spray being a murder that's more expensive when it targets a dragon. And I could cast either of those, get the flurry effect, and kill my opponent's creature. I opted to cast the Dragon Spray because I thought that would be the more powerful spell. But I had a Sultai deck with a lot of regrowth effects. The 2 mana instant speed blue-green regrowth in the set. I had 2 of those. And the way the game ended up playing out was the very next turn after I cast my Dragon Spray, my opponent slammed an Armament Dragon. I think they had the globe in play, so it ended up with 7 power. And then it killed me 1 turn before the Dragon Spray came off suspend, so I think I kind of misprioritized that. And then I was like looking at a copy of my regrowth, wishing I could buy back a Dragon Spray to cast it and use it. I remember that as a misplay. In my second match, which ended up being an unintentional draw, I didn't realize the card Snowmelt Stag, I think is its name, had Vigilance. It's a 2/5 that becomes a 5/2 during your turn. You can pay 7 mana to make it unblockable. So I ended up like taking a few more minutes than I should have to win game 2, and I think I was ahead on board in game 3 when it ended up being a draw. And so I think I could have pulled that one out if I just looked a bit closer, realized that my card had vigilance. I think I'd bordered it in over a card I didn't like, so I hadn't played with it much. That was definitely a spot where maybe a little bit more limited prep, I would have been a bit more familiar with that card and not made that mistake. And then I think my third match was very close, but I just ultimately wasn't quite able to pull it out. I think my deck ended up being a bit underpowered. I didn't have like great top end on it, but yeah, not. Couple misplays. I think the draft didn't end up quite going perfectly. Part of it just didn't, like open any great bombs or anything that was a clear signal that I wanted to be doing something. Ended up with a Sultai deck that felt okay, but just wasn't quite able to get the job done with.
Joe, thanks for giving that feedback too, because I mean, not everyone ends up towards the very end of a 1,200 person tournament or 1,000 person tournament or whatever, whatever the final count was. Like, so much Magic to be playing, and mistakes definitely happen. I'm curious as to like what it feels like physically. Lee and I talk a lot about prepping your mind and your body for long events like this. Were there any things you were like really happy that you did, or you wish you had done better? Food, water, coffee. What are you feeling like after 2 days and 14 rounds of Magic?
Very, very tired. Honestly, I got pretty terrible sleep. My dog woke me up in the middle of the night, and I couldn't get back to sleep. So it was pretty tired, but wasn't feeling it too bad. One thing I did was just both days I just brought multiple bottles of Gatorade with me to just like stay hydrated. Another thing I made a conscious effort of after just having felt really tired during day 2s of previous large events was just telling myself like find a table, sit down between rounds, rest. Like I usually just will kind of wander around between rounds, and like if you wander around a convention hall for like 20 minutes, out of every hour or so, the rounds typically end up being like about an hour and 10 minutes. With all said, between like the time they give people to get to their tables, the 50 minutes itself, and the time people spend in extra turns, and there's usually some people who got time extensions on top of that. Could end up being like 75 minutes sometimes between the start of one round, the start of the next. And so if you spend that time just walking in a circle, I feel like you just end up way more tired at the end of the day. So I think that was one thing I was happy with, and did try to make a conscious effort of, was just sit down, listen to a podcast, read a book, do something that's just not going to take up quite as much energy.
And for my education here, what time did you get there in the morning of the second day, and when did you actually finish playing Magic?
So I believe I arrived around 8:35, 8:45. Second draft, or the first draft, started at 9 a.m. And then I think it was like 5 or 6 p.m. when round 14 ended. And they had the top 8 cut.
Okay, just a casual 9-hour day, no big deal.
Yeah, nice relaxing day of Magic.
So I assume that took up your whole SCG con. Do you have any other thoughts on just the conference in general? Did you do anything on Friday, or any other thoughts on just the event overall?
Yeah, I didn't end up coming out on Friday. I sort of figured I'd probably be exhausted enough by the end of the weekend without playing a couple of ReCQs the day before, which I think I'm happy with how that worked out. Would have probably been even more fatigued on Sunday if I'd spent all of Friday, trying to play a couple of ReCQs to get qualified for the Modern season. But overall, I think these events have been a couple SCG cons for the RCQs. Yeah, they're pretty well run. They have a good amount of side events, good vendors. It's nice getting to go to the artists if you have the time between rounds.
Did you get any swag, or did you get any signatures or anything?
I didn't. I'd been thinking about bringing my Rob Alexander duels to get those signed, but I forgot to pull them in into my bag before Saturday. I was hoping I'd have time Sunday, but I don't think he was there on Sunday, or at least if he was, it never lined up with when I wasn't playing.
That would have been my bad. I should have taken your cards for you if you made the decision. So I ended up getting more cards signed for other people than I did myself. I only had like 11 cards this convention when I normally have hundreds.
Yeah, and why don't we talk about kind of what your convention looked like, Grant? I know you got there. We got there early on Friday and jammed a bunch of legacy and stuff. Like, what was your thoughts on SCG Con?
I thought it was really great. Like, I've been to a couple SCG cons too. I've actually been to an SCG con in Roanoke, where Star City is, Roanoke, Virginia, where Star City is headquartered. That was super cool. I really do like how the SCG team runs their events. There were a couple things about this one that I didn't really love, but like beggars can't be choosers, and they're mostly nitpicky. But I thought that the security situation was like really, really spooky. Like there was no metal detectors, no security, no nothing, no bag check, just people going in and out as they please, which I never really love to see that. But, that's just me being, I think, overly auspicious, if that's the right word to use. Other than that, though, I thought the events were really well run. All the ones I did, they fired on time, they finished on time. I played a legacy event on Friday. Went 3-2 with Bug Beans. I should have 4-1, but I'm bad at Magic, so the deck went 4-1 is what I've been telling folks. And then I played two modern ReCQs. I lost in round two of both of them to the same deck. I played Ruby Storm, or like Boros Storm, and I lost to the Demir Frogtide in both rounds. And like the games weren't even close. I didn't resolve a meaningful spell in 4 games against that deck all weekend. But that's my quick roundup. I also really my highlight was seeing everyone from Denver out and about, like just having a good time. It was like a farmer's market for nerds, is like the best way to put it. And then I also was able to pick up my last three City of Traders and a playset of Show and Tells, just to keep my legacy battle box a little bit more fresh. I like basically got rid of all my CEDH stuff for three City of Traders. So, and that was through Magnolia Games and friend of the show Tyler Regals.
You can never go wrong buying a bunch of reserved list cards, so that's awesome.
No money was spent. This was all Monopoly money, in-game currency, if you will.
I know there was a bunch of people there playing Legacy. I had built a couple of decks just to mess around with, and then I end up giving my blue-red Stifle Delver deck to Kurash to play, which was really fun to watch. You know, he's like a die-hard lands player, so kind of watching him Force Will, Lightning Bolt, and Brainstorm was a highlight. But you battled on Legacy most of the day on Friday. What did the top tables look like? Like, what looked good to you after one of our first events after the BNR?
Yeah, I mean, there were two decks that stood out to me. I lost to both of them, and they both seem like really good right now. That being the Naughty Breakfast deck, which I've probably brought up every single time we've talked about Legacy on this show. I think that deck is just so well rounded, and it's like it might even be pushing past the line of what should be allowed. Just because Cavern of Souls making Nadu uncounterable is like really a problem. It is really a problem in Legacy. So I was really impressed with that deck. The my round two opponent that I lost to ended up winning the whole thing, winning the oversized legacy card. And then I also lost to a mono blue painter player who didn't play very tight, like didn't play very clean, but the deck was just like so powerful it didn't matter. It was a weird feeling, like, and I think the player was like fairly new. This is also not me trying to knock the player. It's just my read on the situation. And it was just like every turn there was a stock up plus something else. Every turn there was, this, that, or whatever. Thoughtcast, Emery, Tameo. Like, and then it was just like, okay, I've burnt out all my interaction on all these cards, and then they just like grindstone painter you. It's like, okay. There's a lot of angles that deck can attack on. So those are the two decks I was most impressed with.
I mean, that blue painter deck on paper just looks absolutely disgusting to me. I don't know how you could ever fight that on a fair axis. They just draw so many cards. I mean, I don't know. I'm with you. I think that deck's just awesome. I don't have any reps against it yet, but it would not surprise me if the kind of blue Tameo Ancient Tomb shell with Painter Grindstone ends up like bubbling its way to the top of the format. I don't know what its bad matchups look like. Like, I don't know how it deals with oops and some of the other stuff at the top, but you get to board into 8 forces and you have a combo and a bunch of card draw. Like, I don't know. That deck just seems awesome to me, and I expect to see a lot more of it.
Joe, what do you think? I'm curious your thoughts on Legacy. I know you don't play it a ton, but you still have quite the Legacy collection, and you do come out every now and again.
Yeah, I haven't got to play much since the last BNR, but yeah, I think both Blue Painter and the Show and Tell decks are both in the space of there these proactive combo decks that get to play Force of Will and now Stock Up. I think Stock Up really gives it that late game staying power that these base blue combo decks didn't previously always have. Or decks like Demir, like Reanimated with Frog, kind of had that late game advantage engine, and I think getting to add that to a combo deck that also gets to play this really premium interaction Force of Will, I think gives the deck some real power and a very good place to be in the metagame.
Cool. Yeah, Joe, what are you also playing in Legacy today if you had to go to Eternal Weekend tomorrow?
I think I'd want to try out Blue Painter. I picked up some Sea to Sign odds last week and been been wanting to try that one out next.
Definitely. Yeah, we could definitely get some reps in too, because I have now put together Oops All Spells. I'm tired of losing to it, and no one's playing it in paper, so I'm going to be that guy. So everyone's being put on notice right now. Legacy aside, though, I do have this pleasure of mine to basically be able to take the headphones off and sit back and let you two talk about standard if you want to pivot over to your success on the weekend, Lee.
Man, I was just excited. I got to like play my red deck one more time and have it count for something. So, if you've not been to SCG Con, they have these events called ReCQs, and I was talking to the judging staff, and I guess because it's technically a destination event in air quotes is how Wizard deems the SCG Con, they're allowed to host RCQ type events, but they don't have to be tied to the RCQ format. So on Friday at, I think it was noon, I got to play in the standard ReCQ, and if I went 5-0, it would qualify me to the next set of modern RCs, which I think is Houston and Vegas in October, November. So I took the red deck that I've been playing the entire RCQ season. I played mono red this time, but just splashing for Questing Druid in the sideboard off the 4 Verges. And the change that I made was I took out the Monastery Swift Spears and the second Witchstalker Frenzy, which to me were just the weakest cards in the deck. Like, the deck is a really creature heavy deck. It's not really a spell heavy deck. So Swift Spear was always kind of underwhelming. And what I did is I just took the 4 Sunspine Links from the sideboard and put them in the main deck and played a 23rd land. So that's the deck that I registered for the event, and I filled the sideboard with just a little bit more interaction and pyroclasm and stuff. And I mean, honestly, the deck was just amazing all day. I played in round 1, I played against the blue-white Omniscience deck, which is trying to like basically reanimate Omniscience and then kind of go off from there. And that deck was pretty scary. I did lose game 2. They just had like a perfect draw and basically put 2 Omnisciences into play on I think at the 3rd turn. So that was really scary. But after that, it was pretty smooth sailing. In game 3 of that match, I boarded in all of my shocks. And actually, this is a question that Joe asked me earlier in the podcast. I cut all the Torch the Towers from my deck, and I just put 4 extra shocks in the sideboard just so that I would have 8 total 1 mana interactive spells for the red mirrors. And if I had flooded out on burn spells and they didn't have targets, they could all go upstairs. And this actually really paid off. I ended up with 2 shocks when my opponent tried to reanimate their Omniscience into play, and I was able to attempt to shock it when they put their first spell in the stack. They had a single counter spell, and I shocked it again. So I was able to get Omniscience off the table and ended up winning that game. So that was really fun. In round 2, I played against like a blue-red kind of cycling deck based on Monument of Endurance, or Monument to Endurance. So it was kind of an interesting deck with Marauding Mako and a couple of the Aether Drift cards that trigger and get bigger off of cycling, but that was a pretty easy 2-0. My opponent's deck just didn't really cooperate, and I think in the first or second game he mulled a 5, so that was a pretty easy 2-0. In round 3, I played against the Teamer Otters deck, which CFT Sock Ray Zhang kind of put on the map. And actually, I was a little spooked to play this deck because the last time I had played it, I lost in a very tight 3-game set against Ray Zhang himself at SCG Con Atlanta in January when we went to play. But I was able to pull that one out in 3, so I was 2-1 in that match. And then probably the most interesting deck of the day I played was in round 4, which was a new Chorus Steel Cutter deck, the new one from Tarkir Dragonstorm that basically like makes a token when you cast 2 spells. And so this was kind of like a blue-red
prowess deck with Swift Spear, Core Steel Cutter, and Slick Shot Show Off. But again, my shocks ended up being really good. I was able to board into just a lot more removal than they were, and kind of able to take the control role in that matchup and keep his board clear basically, and then just ground him out with the mice creatures, which were just ultimately more powerful than what he put on the table. So, but that deck was really cool, and that's a card that I did pre-order. I think Core Steel Cutter is going to be a player definitely in Standard, probably in Pioneer if we ever play that format again. And it's winning Modern too. Like, I've seen it in the top 8 of a bunch of the Modern challenges in the kind of a blue-red prowess shell. So I think that card is just going to kind of potentially be the best card for constructed out of Tarkir Dragonstorm. And I'm excited to get my playset and play with it. So anyway, I ended up 4-0 at the end of 4 rounds, and I was watching kind of the end. The guy next to me was playing blue-black kind of control deck, and he ended up winning the match, and then we get paired for round 5. So I knew what my opponent was on. I had seen kind of a good bit of his deck, lots of interaction, lots of removal spells, and I win the die roll, very skillful, and was able to just keep a really strong 7 in game 1. He had 2 removal spells, but I ended up having 4 creatures, and he ended up not being able to answer the combination of Emberheart Challenger plus Manifold Mouse, which just kind of took over the game. So that was game 1. Game 2 is the opposite story. I mulled a 6, he kept a strong 7, and I think I was telling you, Grant, when I got up to play game 2 of that match, he goes, turn 1, cut down, turn 2, shoot the sheriff, turn 3, anoint with affliction, turn 4, Phyrexian Obliterator. And I had to read Phyrexian Obliterator because I hadn't looked at that card in 10 or 15 years, probably since, it was first released. But for those of you who are not aware, it's 4 black mana for a 5/5 trample. And anytime it's dealt damage, I have to sacrifice that many permanents. So I basically have no way to kill that card, and I instantly died. So that was a really quick game 2. And then we played a really tight game 3. I'm really kind of glad we got to play a really good game. We both kept 7. It was a lot of back and forth, a pretty grindy game. I actually ended up cutting a land out of my deck, so I ended up playing with 22 lands. And the board kind of gets down to a place where my opponent has multiple Archfiend of the Dross in play, and I resolve Sunspine Links. And it looks like it's going to end up being a race. And on the turn where it kind of comes down to, kind of the very last points that we're going to deal, the line that I find to win is to pre-combat Obliterating Bolt targeting his 6/6 demon, then go to combat. He's forced to block, and I end up having Monstrous Rage to trample over for exactly lethal. He was at 6. So the Sunspine Links grew to 8 power, and the Archfiend of the Dross had 4 damage on it already, so I was able to trample over for exactly 6 for lethal. So that was pretty fun, honestly. I thought my run of RCQ style stuff with the red deck and Standard was over, and I got like one last shot to do it, and pretty stoked to get my first RC invite. So I was basically on a high the entire rest of the day.
Yeah, no doubt. You've also been grinding away on Standard Season 2. Joe, I want to flip it over to you too. You're qualified for both of these RCs, right?
Yes, yeah. I won one RCQ, and then I wasn't planning on going to both. I had actually conceded a couple top 8s toward the end of the season. But then I did well at RC Charlotte, and that gave me a second qualification, and I have since guilted myself into going to both, so I do plan on attending both.
Perfect. Now I just got to qualify. But I do have some plans to do that here for this season because, I'm making the full commitment to Modern RCQ season. I made sure to round off a couple pieces for a few decks today, so I'll have the Affinity deck, the Jeskai Ascendancy deck, which is just bad Underworld Breach. Then I'll have Ruby Storm and the Demir Frogtide deck. Joe, what is your plan for Modern RCQ season?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure. I think I'm interested in Belcher. I think that deck is really able to prey on Eldrazi. There's very little they can do against it, and I think with Eldrazi getting this exciting new card in Ugin, and it was already a good deck to begin with, that's gonna probably push it up into being, maybe firmly the best deck. And I think, being advantage against that's a good spot to be. It's also just a deck that's been quietly performing very well for a long time. It just has, a really strong proactive game plan and a bunch of free counter magic to back it up. Does well against Amulet Titan. I think its bad matchups are probably some of the more fair mid-rangey decks, like Ketchmos and Frog, and I think those decks are gonna take a bit of a hit from Eldrazi getting strengthened. So I think that'll indirectly put Beltry in a good spot. So I think I'll probably start by trying to build that. But I'm also a filthy Breach player at heart, so I might try out some more, the various Tameo, Emery, Mox Opal, Mox Amber, Mishra's Bauble shells.
I was telling Lee, a few weeks ago that I think that shell is still the best thing to be doing in Modern. I'm not sure if it's the Jeskai Ascendancy version or if it's just, Fair Affinity or if it's Kethis or Urza Thopter Sword or whatever it looks like. But I'm with you. I think that I want to toy around with that core as well. But, Lee, I want to hear too from you because you have one more invite to get so you can get your double shot at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked on this podcast before how I've always felt kind of lost in Modern because I always want to try to play reactive and it never works. So I bought the rest of the cards to put together the Boros Energy deck this weekend. I had a lot of it already, the Ragavans and the Fables and a bunch of that stuff, but I grabbed some Ocelot Prides at SCG Con, and we got a couple Seasoned Pyromancers, and honestly, that deck, when I laid it out on my desk, I was like, man, this deck is just full of super busted cards that are extremely good. So I'm excited to play Energy. I haven't ever played it before. I didn't play it at all on the last RCQ season when it was kind of the Nadu mess and the rest of it. So I think it kind of suits my play style, Grant, of just being proactive and being aggressive and figuring out how to win combat math and doing all that stuff. So I'm excited to just put people to the test and see how good the Energy deck is. I've seen a bunch of people already posting that they won their first RCQs with Modern, and it keeps putting up good results in online. So I don't know. I'm hoping it's good. Let me put it that way.
I don't think it can be bad. That's for sure. Joe, sorry, I don't know. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think Energy's kind of been. I know people like to complain about it, but I think it's it's sort of just the fair kind of policeman deck on the format. It's White Jund, I've been calling it. It's just a bunch of really individually powerful threats, some efficient interaction, and then being a white deck, it actually has access to really good sideboard cards. And yeah, I think it's still interesting to see how people are building it. I know I saw some people trying out Voice of Victory in the Modern 10K. The new card it's a 1/3 for 2 with Mobilize 2. And then it says opponents cannot cast spells during your turn. Really nice getting to pair the Mobilize tokens with Goblin Bombardment. You don't have to worry about your opponent killing a Johnny in response to the flip. So really interesting options there. Kind of stuff keeps getting banned from Energy, and so it's always interesting to see how it's gonna adapt to fill those slots. But it's a very deep pool of cards it can run. People are looking at splashing more colors again, going blue for Mockingbird to kind of accelerate some of your more aggressive starts. You can dip into black for Thoughtseize and Orcish Bowmasters. And I think that core of just Ocelot Pride, a Johnny, and Guide of Souls is just really powerful, and there's going to be something you can fit it into.
Yeah, that's just how I felt, and it's just such a powerful, proactive strategy with all the 1-drops. And then you have basically one of the best inevitability engines ever printed in Flage with Arena. And I don't know, every time I'd played against that deck with the Frog deck or with some of the other fair decks that I played in the last RCQ season, I felt like I would be at parity and fight. And then Flage would come and end the game. So I kind of just wanted to be on the other side of it. And I'm with you. I think Voice of Victory is quite good. It sneakily does a bunch of things in the deck. So first off, it's a white card, but the tokens that it makes are red, which is pretty important for a Johnny. And then the other thing about that card is that even though they're combat sort of trigger tokens, they don't die at end of combat. They stay till end of turn. So you can actually stack the Ocelot Pride triggers with it and double up the tokens and keep them. I think maybe playing 2 right now is kind of where my head's at. And I get to kind of cut some of the clunky 3-drops and and play more 2-drops and make the deck a little bit more lean. So I am definitely going to be playing Voice of Victory. I haven't seen any other cards specifically for that deck, but I think it's also, like you said, very easy to splash blue. I think the reason that I would want to splash blue is to play Consign to Memory in the sideboard. I think the Eldrazi decks, if they become very good, I think are problematic. They just go over the top of the energy deck. But right now the deck as I have it constructed, there's somewhere between 12 and 13 fetch lands. So, you can play one Hallowed Fountain and 13 fetch lands and have, access to 14 blue sources basically for Consign, which is, I think, more than enough to be competitive. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. I have 0 reps with the deck, but I've watched it a ton, with coverage, and I've played it against it a whole bunch. So I know. Honestly, the other thing I like about the energy deck as it's constructed is like it very clearly knows what the bad matchups are. Like I've seen a bunch of them with like 4 Orum's Chance or 4 Molten Rains or whatever, right? The sideboard, it seems to be, is like very targeted against the decks that it has problems with, because it's just the best fair deck, it seems like to me. Like it just goes toe to toe with any other deck playing fair, and your sideboard kind of just gets to cover the holes where people go around, what your general strategies kind of do. So I don't know. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks also agree with Voice of Victory too, because that card's running about $17 right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it's probably going to maintain that price. It has some very advantageous text for Commander. And then I think on top of that, if it just sees standard play, it could be one of these multi-format staples.
Cool. I think that just about wraps up everything that I had here. I want to flip it over to you two to kind of say any last words for today's pod. Any other final thoughts before we wrap up here?
Free Underway Breach did nothing wrong.
Oh, Joe. I know you love your Breach, man, but that is never coming back. If you really want to play Breach, I think you got to go play Vintage. Like, I think that's going to be your only opportunity to play Breach. I guess to wrap here, I was gonna ask you both what your next big events are that you're prepping for. Like Joe, you said you're gonna go to the RCs. Like when are those events? And is that the next thing you're trying to get prepared for?
Yeah. Next big event is RC Minneapolis. I believe that's May 2nd through 4th standard. So yeah, haven't really paid much attention to standard in the last weeks, seeing how the new cards from Tarkir have impacted it. I know Pixie gets another bounce creature in Sun Pearl Kirin. Some of the red decks have been adapting, adding Teysa Light Shatter. Sorry, it's my dogs. So yeah, wanna explore, see how that format's updated. Been more focused on limited since the set dropped, obviously. But yeah, gonna get into standard prep, and then also just start playing some modern for modern season.
Is your inclination to play the Pixie deck as your plan A for the standard RC?
I think I'll probably start with Pixie. It's what I was playing towards the end of the season. I think there's a few good options. There's obviously the top 3 decks. There's Red, Pixie, and Domain. I think some other interesting ones I've wanted to explore are the Otters deck you mentioned. I know a friend of mine, Michael Boland, has been working on that deck a lot, really likes it. Feels like he's got the red matchup in a good place, really good plan for Pixie. And then I think the deck was already pretty good against Domain. Some other interesting options are that Omniscience deck, which I think is strong enough to be able to hang with everything else. It's just sort of a question of how much hate people bring for it. And then there's the various control decks, blue-black and blue-white, I think are sometimes able to kind of tune themselves to have decent enough matchups against the Pixie decks and the red decks, and then are very favored against Domain because they have the plan of just decking them with Jace that Domain has a very hard time dealing with.
Wow, sounds like you got a bunch of options on the table. If you if you need any reps against red, let me know. We appreciate you coming on. It's nice to have somebody else on the pod, so it's not just Grant and I kind of talking at each other. And congratulations again, man. Like, I know it's kind of bad beats to kind of get through the last rounds and not qualify for the PT, but 23rd out of like 1,200 has to feel good. And I mean, you got to be taking a bunch of confidence from here into your future events to know that you can hang.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me on the pod.
Well, we can call it there. Joe, I'll echo Lee's feelings there. Congrats again. Thank you for joining us. And Lee, as per usual, it's always a pleasure, my dude.
Yep. See you guys. Cheers.